All right, now in this video, we are going to learn how to actually set up the compressor. So I'm going to teach you how to set up a compressor for any instrument, in any song, in any genre. And it's actually a very simple process. So it really just involves you knowing which knobs to turn, what order to turn them in, and requires you to use your ears and really listen. So the way that we're going to go about this is first we're going to set up the attack, and then set up the release, and then the ratio, and then the threshold. But first off, we need to set the ratio, the release, and the threshold at some pretty extreme settings so that we can really hear what's going on with the attack. So first off, we're going to set this up on some drums, and then we'll set it up on an acoustic guitar just so you can see the setup process quickly over a couple different instrument groups. So here's the drums that we're going to be setting up. All right, they already sound pretty decent, but we want to compress them a little bit more to bring out a little bit more of the room sound and to kind of just glue them together. So I'm going to unbypass the compressor that I've got across this drum bus. And remember, I said the ratio, the release, and the threshold are going to have to be set at kind of extreme settings. So let's do that. Let's turn the ratio all the way up to at 20 or more. Set the release as low as 20 milliseconds or lower. Now I find with this compressor, this is the stock compressor in Pro Tools, if you put it faster than 20 on this sound, it starts to distort a little bit. So I'm just going to leave it at 20. And the attack doesn't matter where you set it. We're going to start out low. That's actually a better place to start it, is to start out low. And the threshold, let's turn it all the way up for now. And then we're going to pull it down so we get a lot of compression right off the bat. So here's the drum sound. And I'm just going to pull the compression down, or pull the threshold down, so we start getting a ton of compression. So, and I'll look on the gain reduction meter here until I get about 20 to 30 dB of compression. Just really slam it. You can, turn it all the way down if you want, but you just end up going over and futzing with the controls a little bit more. So I turn it down until I see, between 20 and 30 dB of compression. Now it's time to set up the attack. So I'm going to push this attack up and really listen to the kick drum and the snare drum. Listen to the beginning of those hits, like the actual stick hitting the snare drum. And as I get up into 5 and 10 milliseconds, it starts poking through. And as I get into 20 and 30 milliseconds, the stick starts sounding fatter because more of that stick is poking through before the compressor grabs onto it. So we're just going to turn the attack up until we find something that we like. Right there, it's starting to sound nice. It's got a nice little attack to it. Up here, it's maybe a little too much. So I keep an eye on the gain reduction here. We want that to stay right around 20 dB, between 20 and 30. So if it starts getting a little too high, so not enough compression, I'll turn the threshold down to make sure we keep it down around there. And this is so we can really hear what the attack is doing. So let's back off the attack a little bit. I'm just listening to the very leading edge of the sound. So that snap when the kick and the snare hit. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. All right, so I'm going to pull the threshold down just a little bit more because I know that when we go to the release, it's going to lighten up on the compression. So now with the release, what we want to do is make the release longer until it starts to become a rhythmic part of the sound. What I mean by that is the compressor will start to let go in a rhythm. For this drum, it's kind of when the hi-hat comes in. So we want the compressor to be almost completely let go when that hi-hat comes in. So really listen to how the sound starts to pump and move as I make this release longer. Now, as we get too long, as I get into 2 and 3 and 4 and 500 milliseconds, the sound starts to feel really clamped down. Hear that hi-hat? It's starting to get sucked down, and that's not what we want, so let's back it back up. Right around there feels pretty good. I feel the room start to come back up. All right, so let's leave it at that. And now let's go back to the ratio. So remember, with ratios like how much control do you want? The downside, well, the upside to a high ratio is you get a lot of control. So the sound really, it stays right where you want it. The downside of that is it feels kind of small, kind of tiny. So what we need to do with the ratio is find a good balance of big sound and also control. So I'm going to start backing this ratio down, and you'll hear the drum kit start to get bigger. We want to find the good ratio. Now, I happen to know typically with drums it's somewhere between 2 and 4. Really sounds good on this kind of rock style drums. So listen as I back off the ratio. Hear it start to get bigger there. Let's split the difference between 2 and 4. It's starting to sound pretty good there. Well, let's leave it right about there. Now we go to the threshold. Now you can see we're still getting like 20 dB of compression, which is a ton of compression. You're going to start running into artifacts like the hi-hat gets lost on that snare hit because it's just slamming it so much. So we want to back the threshold off until we get kind of a nice, little more even sound. And at this point too, I might go back and just kind of finesse my release a little bit because we're not compressing so much, so the compressor doesn't have to release at huge distance. So we might be able to get away with a little bit longer release as I bring the threshold up. give it a little bit more. Okay, so here I'm also looking at the in and the out. So now is a good time to go back here to makeup gain, and I'm going to push the makeup gain up a little bit as I kind of watch the in and the out, and I want them to be about the same volume, roughly the same volume around the peaks. All right, now let's bypass it and let's see what we did. Pretty good. Maybe a little bit less. Let's back off the compression a little bit. Maybe we'll sneak the attack time up just a little bit more. Cool. So that sounds pretty good. So we ended up with an attack time of about 15 milliseconds. The release time of about 140, a ratio of 3:1, and the threshold and the gain, they were just set to taste. All right, so let's try this again on an acoustic guitar. I've got the acoustic guitar right down here. Now take a quick listen to this guitar by itself. There's actually a pair of guitars. So we've got one left and one right, and they're two separate passes of the same recording, so two separate takes. Now listen to it in the mix.
An ordinary evening, a sea of endless sand at the edge of...
Now because they're two actual separate takes, and the guitar player played them separately, there's slight volume differences between the two. And I'm going to use compression to fix those. And also to fix the difference in volume between the loud strums and the quiet strums. So to do this, first let's just set one compressor. So I'm going to take, well, I guess I didn't have that panned all the way left. Well, so we're going to pan one in the middle, and we're just going to listen to this one as we set the compression up for this one, and then we'll copy it over to the other one. All right, so again, same thing. First off, we'll set the ratio pretty high, 20:1, set the release to 20, and the attack will start out at about 1 millisecond. All right, roughly right around there. I'll pull the threshold down until we get massive amounts of compression. Oh yeah, a nasty distortion. I'm going to go ahead and turn the makeup gain up now, just so we can hear what's going on. All right, so for this guitar, when we pull the attack up, we're really listening for the strums, the fingernails or the pick on the strings. We want that to sort of poke through, but we also want the guitar or the compressor to clamp down and grab them. But yes, they still kind of need to poke through a little bit. So let's do this. Let's turn it up and see what we come up with. All right, that seems to be pretty good. Let's push it too far. So I hear some are poking through and some are getting, getting grabbed. So let's go back here where all of them are getting grabbed, but they're still shining through a little bit. All right, and this is a pretty percussive part. So, yeah, 17.6 milliseconds sounds good. Let's leave it there. Now let's go to the release. As I pull this up, listen for the groove. Listen to that compressor start to release in time or in groove. That feels good. That's actually pretty close to what we got with the drums, but that's okay. All right, now for size. How big do we want it, right? Typically with acoustic guitar, something percussive like this, you're looking at, it's going to end up between 6 and 3. But let's just use our ears and let's pull this down and listen to the size of the acoustic guitar get bigger. Okay, now let's back off the threshold a little bit. A little click bleed there. I think that sounds pretty good. Now I'm watching the levels here, the in and the out. I'm going to adjust the makeup gain so that the in and the out are about the same, roughly. All right, so let's bypass. Let's take a listen. We'll put it back in and hear what we did. This is with no compression. Here's that same line with compression. All right, let's copy this over here to the other track. Let's take a listen to both of them together. Let me pan this over to the right. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Pretty even between the left and the right. Let's bypass it. I just want to hear those two again uncompressed. Hear how the stereo field moves from left to right? Like sometimes the right guitar is noticeably louder, sometimes the left guitar is noticeably louder. Well, let's put the compressors back in and have a listen. Still a slight difference, but way, way, way better. Now, let's hear it in the mix.
An ordinary evening, a sea of endless sand, at the edge of the blue where the water meets the
Yeah, that's really cool. So, just to recap, setting up any compressor on any instrument. First, you want to set up the attack, then the release, then the ratio, and then the threshold. And then, of course, the makeup gain at the very end to make sure that the volume is the same or close to the same when it's bypassed and unbypassed. Now, you first also want to set the release, the ratio, and the threshold to some pretty extreme settings so that you can really hear what the attack is doing. And then you keep those extreme settings for the ratio and the the ratio and the threshold while you set up the release. And then you set up the ratio, you kind of back it off a little bit until it sounds nice and big. And then you back off the threshold a little bit until you get enough compression to control the signal. And that's it. Very simple. So now in the next few videos, we're going to go through and we're going to use this method and set up compression on a bunch of different instruments. Drums, we're going to do acoustic guitars again, bass, vocals, and a few other things.